Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amber Oostvogels. I'm with DEME for a bit more than 11 years. I'm an insurance manager for DEME. And I wanted to shortly discuss the evolution that I saw over the last 11 years in, on one hand, the allocation of risk, the contractual allocation of risk, and on the other hand, the insurance cover that is offered to tackle that risk as much as possible, of course. So I wanted to start with the historical contractual approach. So on one hand, you have the care of the works, of course, according to the normal standard FIDIC contracts that we see, or the FIDIC-based contracts. So you have you as a contractor, you have the care of the works, regardless of negligence, as from commencement date until taking over. This includes damage resulting from external causes, obviously. And of course, there are employers' risks as a carve-out from that principle of care of the works. After the takeover, the defects notification period starts, which goes from 2 to 5 years, let's say. Normally, of course, we would hope that it would be 2 years for T&I contracts and a bit more for EPCI contracts eventually. And in that period, the contractor's responsibility is limited to defects caused by the works. The liability system between parties, it's not something that I really wanted to go into because indeed, Marianne already touched upon that. So we prefer, obviously, a knock-for-knock system. But as an alternative, we are sometimes obliged to accept negligence-based liability systems. And then, so you used to have that allocation, you had that allocation of risk for projects that were indeed executed in Europe in generally. So with a certain type of weather conditions, with a supply chain that was nearby, with smaller vessels at the time, because when I started working for DEME, we had a big vessel, which was our flagship vessel. Now, these days, we only use it to do repairs because it's too small to do the big installations now. So the reality has changed. But at the time, for that allocation of risk in that zone, you had a typical WindCAR-based constructional risk policy, which was Lake 3, so improvement defects cover for everything but turbines. For turbines, Lake 2, so the consequences defects cover was, I think I can say, always the standards. You had a full guarantee maintenance, which was for 36 months, maybe sometimes 24, but in general 36 months. You had a series loss clause that was limited to turbines only, so not for all the other installation items, which is really very important, of course. And also another very important thing to emphasize there is that for a series loss, so when the policy was triggered by a series loss, the deductible would apply once per root cause. The deductibles that applied at the time, they were rather low. Of course, they were depending on project, but I think we could say that they were rather low. And then section 2 of lesser importance, primary cover, I think it's fair to say that 25 million cover was the standard and still is the standard, although it's now challenged that it's primary sometimes. What we now see on recent projects, so where we had the care of the works allocation of risk allocated to the contractor, that is still the case. So that principle hasn't changed, with the difference that employers' risks are more challenged now. That's what we see. But in the same moment, they became much more relevant because we are now working in the US, we are working in Taiwan. So because of the geographical expansion of offshore wind, the risks that are tackled under the employer's risks have become much more relevant, of course, because an volcano or something, in front of the Danish coast, the risk is, of course, obviously much lower. So the employer's risks are have become much more important. Again, what I touched upon already was the size of the installation items and vessels have increased drastically. And of course, the resulting risk has increased as well. And also the supply chain, if you have to do a repair, because that's what we sometimes talk about with insurers, like, okay, we have been installing wind farms in Europe, we could do it, we proved that we could, why wouldn't we be able to do it in the US? But then the difference is that they say, well, if something happens there, a repair is much more costly because you have to send a vessel there, or you have to go and pick up an installation item in Europe because that's where it's produced. So a repair, the cost for a contractor, based on an unchanged allocation of risk, has increased drastically. In general, the liability system between parties has remained unchanged. So also there, still the discussion, knock for knock or negligence-based. So I think it's fair to say that a combination of the activities in certain areas of the world combined with the allocation that was used in the previous periods when we were only developing offshore wind in Europe has led to an increased risk profile of the contractor. That's on one hand, and then on the other hand, this goes combined with the deterioration of the constructional risk policy that is offered for offshore wind now. Because instead of having a leg 3 cover, now, well, almost for all projects, we start negotiations based on a leg 2 cover, because that is what employers know that they will always, or that they hope to be able to place at a very cost-effective way, let's say. And we even see sometimes a leg 1 cover, which is, it's only covering costs resulting from external causes, so it's offering little value for the contractor. So that's one very important difference for us. Then the extended guarantee maintenance, it's also a problem, of course, in the case that we have design, because it wouldn't pick up design issues. The series loss clause has changed drastically as well, because, so first of all, it now generally applies to all installation items, so not only to the turbines. And secondly, it applies a deductible per loss amount, so no longer only per root cause, so once for all the issues you have, but no, per installation item, let's say. So if you combine that with a deductible of a few millions, well, for the T&I contractor, there is little value left in the constructional risk policy. It's the employer, in our vision, is paying probably still a lot of money for an empty box, from that point of view, of course. Then another evolution that we see, which is very delicate, I would say, is the manufacturer's warranty being primary to the constructional risk cover. I think that clause has been there for quite some time, but the problem is how it is applied to the project, because very often we, as a contractor, are in consortium, for example, with the cable supplier. Well, we are the contractor executing the works. The contractor is a named insured under the constructional risk policy. How does that then work with the recourse that the constructional risk insurer is willing to take on that manufacturer, which is also the contractor? So that's one thing. Normally, the explanation that constructional risk insurers give me is that they say that they don't want to pick up product liability issues. So if a cable, for example, or a foundation is manufactured in the wrong way and causes and is broken, not because of the faulty installation, that's something that they say, well, that would be a manufacturer's exposure. We want to take our right of recourse there. On the other hand, it's very often maybe not very clear what is the cause of the damage. So that's one thing. And what with in and out costs then, because one thing is excluding the cost of the product, of the cable, let's say. Another thing is, what do you do with the in and out, with the offshore in and out costs to take out that faulty cable or that defective cable and to put in a new cable? Is that then picked up by the constructional risk policy, regardless of the manufacturer's warranty being primary? For me, that's unclear. we know that there are some suppliers, manufacturers that have an extended product liability cover that could be triggered by that for those in and out costs. On the other hand, then we move away from the all risk principle that a construction all risk policy is supposed to offer to the project, to offer to the benefit of all involved parties in the project, I believe. Another exclusion that we now see, which is also really relevant, it's the exclusion for cable protection system, the CPS exclusion, because of the issues that there were with certain offshore wind farms. Now it becomes a standard exclusion, which is very difficult to tackle or to buy back. And then another one that is also a very delicate clause we see in constructional risk policies, that is the special conditions for other insureds. So that clause, if you read that clause, it states that regardless of the cover that the insurer is offering under its policy, he is allowed to call upon the contractual clause between the contractor and the employer, in which he is no party in that contract, but he can call upon that clause if the contract allows for the contractor to have a more limited cover. So if the contract foresees in a Leg 2 clause, and then the policy is a Leg 3, well, the insurer is allowed to offer only Leg 2 for that contractor, because the contract between the employer and the contractor stated that it was Leg 2. I have challenged this with several brokers, and they tell me that that is not the intention of the clause. I have challenged this with an insurer, and he told me that was the only way I could interpret that clause. So, and he also told me that he was not the party asking for that clause, which was very interesting, I think, because then I'm wondering who wants to have that clause in there. So, and then as last point here, the deductibles, well, they have increased drastically. Yeah? So we see now 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, 7.5 million per loss. Those are almost normal deductibles that we see in offshore wind. If you combine all these things, well, I think it's very fair to say that the insurance cover has decreased drastically, and I can believe that that is because of losses that they paid, but also because, I don't know, because they don't know the industry, because they are not talking to the right persons. I think it's very difficult to understand where this comes from. So, but the new reality is that indeed the contract remains the same, let's say. The risks in the end have increased because of all kinds of factors. And then in addition, the insurance has decreased. The problem is that now we still keep on contracting based on the same contracts. So by doing so, the difference, so the bigger exposure from a contractual point of view and the lower cover from an insurance point of view is fully pushed to the contractor. It's fully to be absorbed by the contractor. And that is something that is, well, personally, I believe that that is unsustainable for the industry. So we need to find a way out there. I honestly don't really know how we can do that. I think we should have work groups maybe with insurers, with employers on how to reestablish a fair allocation of risk, combining it with a robust cover. Because in my experience, well, it's difficult to buy certain insurance covers. On the other hand, if you're willing to pay the premium, there is still a lot possible. But of course, it costs a lot of money. That is true. But then the stakes are high for the contractor as well. So that was what I wanted to say.